She said, "I'm too old for love," until the cowboy stayed the night, and she shuddered till dawn. Clara had lived on her little ranch for more than 20 years, ever since she had lost her husband in a car accident. Life had never been easy, and she had learned to carry its weight quietly. The ranch was small but well kept. The fences were sturdy, the barn was old but strong, and the field stretched wide under the open sky. Each morning she would wake before sunrise, put on her worn boots, and start her day. She fed the animals, checked the fences, and tended to the garden that grew vegetables and flowers alike. Most days were quiet. She enjoyed the stillness, the way the wind could rustle the trees and birds could sing without anyone around to disturb them. But quiet as it was, it came with its own kind of loneliness. Her children were grown now, scattered across different towns, busy with their own lives and families. They called occasionally, and she loved those calls, but they could not fill the emptiness she felt inside. She often thought about the days when laughter had filled the house, when little feet ran across the wooden floors, and when the scent of fresh-baked bread mingled with the smell of hay from the barn. Those days were gone, and in their place was a silence that sometimes felt heavier than she could bear. Clara had tried to accept this quiet life. She reminded herself daily that she was content. She had a roof over her head, land she loved, animals that depended on her, and a small circle of friends in the nearby town. She told herself that love was not for people her age, that it was something meant for the young with hearts full of dreams. She smiled politely when she heard stories of young couples falling in love, and she nodded thoughtfully, telling herself that she had her memories, and that should be enough. Yet, deep down, there was a part of her heart that felt unfinished. Sometimes, in the evenings, when the sun painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, she would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and stare at the horizon. She would think about what it might feel like to have someone by her side again, someone to share the quiet moments, someone who would listen when she spoke about small worries or silly thoughts. But those moments always ended with her shaking her head and muttering, "I'm too old for love. It's not for me anymore." Then, one late afternoon in early autumn, the quiet of her life was broken by the sound of a truck pulling into the driveway. Clara looked up from the tomatoes she was picking and saw a man stepping out of the vehicle. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a strong, steady presence that seemed to belong to the open land itself. His hat was worn, his boots dusty, and the lines on his face spoke of years spent working under the sun and wind. This was Luke, a cowboy passing through the county while managing a herd of cattle. Clara watched him as he approached. There was a kind of calm confidence in the way he moved, and when he tipped his hat and offered a polite smile, she felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. She quickly shook it off. She wasn't used to feeling this way anymore, and she told herself it was just a passing curiosity. Nothing more. Luke explained that he had been driving through the area and had some work that needed to be done near her property. He asked if he could help with a broken fence post that he had noticed from the road. Clara, hesitant at first, agreed. She didn't often let strangers near her home, but there was something about him that felt safe, and she found herself appreciating the company. As they worked together fixing the fence and checking the corners of her fields, Clara found herself talking more than usual. She told him about the animals, the land, and even a little about her past. Luke listened carefully, his attention never wavering, nodding, asking questions that made her feel heard. For the first time in years, she felt a genuine connection with another person. It was a slow kind of connection, built on small acts and shared tasks. Luke didn't try to impress her with grand gestures or flowery words. He simply showed respect for her life, for her routines, and for the effort she put into keeping her little world together. Clara, in turn, felt herself letting down walls she had built over decades. She laughed more freely, she teased him gently about his stubborn way of doing things, and she found herself looking forward to the days he would appear to help with some small chore. Evenings became a little brighter. Sometimes, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun dip below the horizon. Clara would sip her tea while Luke leaned against the railing, telling stories of the places he had traveled, the people he had met, and the challenges he had faced. His stories were never boastful. They were simple, honest reflections of a life lived fully. Clara found herself thinking, maybe life isn't over. Maybe there's still room for something unexpected. Terrible. Despite the spark that was growing between them, Clara continued to repeat her mantra quietly, afraid of admitting her feelings even to herself. "I'm too old for love," she would whisper to the empty fields, hoping the wind would carry away her longing. But deep inside, she couldn't deny the change she felt when Luke was near. Her heart, which had felt silent for so many years, began to stir. She didn't know what the future held, but the present was undeniable. The warmth of his presence, the gentleness in his voice, and the kindness in his eyes made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in decades. That week passed slowly, filled with small, meaningful moments. Luke would show up in the morning to help mend fences, repair the barn, or move feed to the animals. They shared meals on the porch, laughing over simple mistakes or the stubborn ways of their livestock. Clara noticed that the sound of his laughter seemed to linger in her mind long after he had gone. She found herself thinking about him during the quiet moments, wondering what he was doing, hoping he would return. By the end of the week, the rhythm of her life had begun to shift. The chores no longer felt like mere duties. They were opportunities to share moments with Luke. Her thoughts, which had once been filled with memories of the past and regrets of what could have been, now included small daydreams of the days to come. She wasn't ready to admit it aloud, but something inside her was changing, something she had thought long dead. The hope for companionship, for connection, for love was slowly coming back to life. Yet Clara remained cautious. She reminded herself daily of her age, of the life she had lived alone, of the years that had passed. She told herself repeatedly, "This is nice, but it's temporary. I can't expect more." But even as she said it, she felt a secret thrill at the thought of seeing him again, at the idea of sharing a quiet sunset, at the comfort of a presence that didn't demand anything except honesty and kindness. And so her days continued, full of work and routine, but with a new thread of anticipation woven through them. Life on the ranch remained steady, but Clara began to notice small changes in herself. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and felt a warmth in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. She was still the woman who tended to her land and her animals, who lived quietly and responsibly, but now there was an extra layer to her life, one of possibility, of hope, and of a connection that could not be ignored. By the end of that week, Clara could no longer deny that something had shifted. The quiet life she had accepted was no longer the only life she could imagine. She had spent decades convincing herself that love was no longer for her, but now, with Luke's simple presence, she began to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong. Perhaps love didn't have an expiration date. Perhaps life still had surprises in store, even for someone who had long given up on expecting them. And so Clara's heart, long guarded and cautious, began to awaken again, slowly, carefully, with the promise that the quiet life she had known for so long might soon be filled with something more, a chance to feel alive, to feel wanted, to feel loved again. The days after Luke's arrival passed faster than Clara had expected. Each morning she would wake to the familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the clucking of chickens, and the soft whistle of the wind through the trees. Yet now there was something new mixed with these sounds, something that made her heart beat a little faster. The thought that Luke might appear any moment to help with the day's work. Luke seemed to fit naturally into her world. He was quiet when he needed to be and cheerful when the moment called for it. He had a way of noticing the small details, the things that most people overlooked. If a fence post leaned even slightly, he would fix it with care. If a cow looked unwell, he would check it patiently. And all the while he talked to her in a way that made her feel valued, not just as the owner of the ranch, but as a person with her own stories and experiences. Clara found herself sharing things she had never spoken about with anyone. She told him about her late husband, about the hard years she spent raising her children alone, and about the moments she regretted and the ones she cherished. Luke never interrupted, never judged. He simply listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes offering a quiet word of understanding. "You've been strong all your life," he said one morning as they patched a fence together. "I can see it in the way you care for this place. You've built something worth protecting." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. It wasn't flattery. She could tell he meant them. For a moment she almost forgot the worry that had been lodged in her heart for years, that she was too old for love, that the world had passed her by. Luke arrived more often than expected, sometimes to help, sometimes simply to visit. Clara started looking forward to his presence, and her days no longer felt quite so empty. Out of him, the way his hands were rough but careful, how his eyes held a quiet kindness, and how his laugh, deep and unhurried, made her smile even on the most tiring days. One afternoon, they decided to repair the old barn roof together. The sun was high, the air warm with the smell of hay and soil, and the work was hard, but it was enjoyable, too. They moved slowly, carefully, laughing when a plank didn't fit or when a tool slipped from their hands. Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of lightness, of fun, of being fully present in the moment. During a break, they sat on the edge of the barn, legs dangling over the side. Clara sipped from a bottle of water, and Luke offered her a small snack he had brought along. They didn't speak for long, just sat together, sharing the quiet of the afternoon. For Clara, it was comforting to feel this connection, without the pressure of expectation. She could simply be herself. You know, Luke said after a while, most people forget how important it is to take care of what they love. You didn't forget. I had to learn the hard way, she said. Life doesn't give you much time to figure things out. Sometimes it takes longer for some people, but that doesn't mean it's too late. She turned her gaze to the fields, thinking about the years she had spent alone. Could it really be possible, at her age, to find companionship again? To feel that spark she had thought long extinguished? The thought was both thrilling and frightening. The next few days passed in a blend of routine and anticipation. Luke helped her with errands, bringing supplies from town or fixing broken equipment around the ranch. They worked side by side, the rhythm of their tasks creating an unspoken harmony between them. At night, Clara would lie in bed, replaying the moments of the day, thinking about his gentle words, his steady presence, and the way her heart seemed to respond to him in ways it hadn't for decades. One evening, after a long day of moving hay bales, Luke stayed longer than usual. The sun had dipped low, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and purple. Clara suggested they sit on the porch with mugs of hot cocoa, and he agreed. They watched the horizon in silence for a while, letting the colors of the sunset fill the quiet space between them. I haven't seen many sunsets like this, Clara admitted. You're lucky, Luke said. Most people rush past them without noticing. You don't. The warmth of his words made her heart flutter. She realized she was enjoying not just the work, but the moments of quiet companionship, the small exchanges that carried a weight of meaning. She had grown used to being alone, but now she found herself hoping he would linger, that he would continue to be a part of her days. That night, as he left, Clara felt a strange emptiness. She had grown accustomed to his presence, and the absence left a quiet ache in her chest. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just habit, that it didn't mean anything. Yet she knew deep down that she was beginning to care for him more than she had intended. Over the next few days, their friendship deepened. Luke shared stories of his past, times he had struggled, moments he had been proud of, people he had loved and lost. Clara listened intently, finding comfort in his honesty. She, too, shared more of herself, opening doors to parts of her life that had been locked away for years. With every story, every shared laugh, and every quiet moment, the bond between them grew stronger. Clara noticed subtle changes in herself. She began to smile more easily, laugh more freely, and look forward to each day with a new sense of hope. She still reminded herself that she was too old for love, but the thought no longer carried the same weight. The fear that had held her back for so long was slowly giving way to curiosity and longing. One afternoon, a sudden rainstorm caught them while they were checking the fields. They dashed to the barn laughing as the rain soaked their clothes and hair. Inside, they shook off the water and shared a towel, their hands brushing occasionally, sending small jolts of electricity through Clara that she hadn't felt in years. They sat on the barn steps, dripping wet but smiling, and watched the rain fall outside. You make even a rainy day feel good, Clara said, shaking her head in disbelief. Luke chuckled. Maybe it's not the day, but the company. Her heart skipped a beat at the simplicity and truth of his words. She realized that it wasn't just his presence that mattered, but the way he made her feel seen, valued, and alive again. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel invisible, and she didn't feel like love was beyond her reach. As the storm passed, they worked together to ensure the animals were safe, the fences intact, and the barn secure. The mundane tasks felt lighter when shared, and Clara noticed how naturally their teamwork flowed. There was a rhythm to it, an ease that came from mutual respect and quiet understanding. That night, after Luke had left, Clara sat on the porch in the fading light, wrapped in a blanket. She sipped her tea and thought about the week that had passed. Her life had shifted in ways she hadn't expected. She had gone from quiet routine to a world filled with warmth, laughter, and the possibility of companionship. She had spent years convincing herself that she was too old for love, but now she felt something she hadn't felt in decades, a spark of hope, small but undeniable, that life still held surprises. She didn't know where this connection with Luke would lead, or if it would lead anywhere at all. But for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be happy again, where companionship, laughter, and even love were possible. And that thought, fragile and new, was enough to keep her heart awake and her spirit alive. By the end of the week, Clara realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about survival and routine. It was about living, feeling, and opening oneself to the unexpected. She had found someone who reminded her that age was not a barrier to connection, that moments of joy could appear even after years of quiet solitude, and that the heart could still awaken no matter how long it had been dormant. And so Clara went to bed that night with a sense of anticipation. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. Her quiet life had changed, and she was ready to see where this new path might lead, even if it was only step by step, day by day. The weeks passed quickly on the ranch, and with each day, Clara felt the bond between her and Luke grow stronger. What had started as a casual acquaintance had slowly turned into something more profound, something she hadn't expected at her age. She found herself looking forward to his visits, not just because he helped with work, but because his presence made her feel lighter, happier, and more alive. Luke had begun to settle into the rhythm of the ranch, and his help became more than physical. It was emotional support. He encouraged her, reassured her, and made her laugh in ways she had forgotten were possible. Clara found herself sharing details about her life she hadn't told anyone in years, from childhood memories to the struggles of raising her children alone. Each story she told felt like lifting a small weight off her shoulders. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara was in the barn cleaning the stalls when Luke arrived. The smell of hay and the cool breeze reminded her of the simplicity of her life, but also of how much it had changed since he had come into it. Luke carried a small toolbox, ready to fix a leaky section of the roof that had been bothering her for weeks. "Morning, Clara," he greeted with a smile. "Looks like the roof wants some attention today." She returned the smile, feeling a warmth in her chest at the sight of him. "It does. I appreciate your help, Luke. I wouldn't manage this alone." "You wouldn't have to," he said, his eyes kind. "I like helping. It's better than sitting around town doing nothing." As they worked together, fixing the roof, Clara felt an unusual nervousness. It wasn't fear, but something new. A flutter in her chest that she didn't recognize at first. She realized that she cared deeply about what he thought of her. She wanted to impress him, to show him that she could handle things, but also that she welcomed his company. Luke noticed her quiet hesitation and smiled softly. "Don't worry, Clara. You're doing fine, you've got steady hands, and that makes all the difference." Her cheeks warmed at his praise. It was a small comment, yet it held weight, and she felt herself leaning into the comfort of his presence. For years, Clara had been independent, refusing help or companionship because she believed it would complicate her life. But with Luke, it felt different. It didn't feel like dependence. It felt like partnership. After finishing the roof, they took a break, sitting on the porch with mugs of warm cider. The sun was low, casting golden light across the fields, and the world felt peaceful. Clara felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years, but underneath that calm there was something stirring, a recognition that she was beginning to open her heart again. "You know," Luke began, his voice soft, "I've met a lot of people in my life, but very few leave a lasting impression. You're different." Jesus looked down at her mug, trying to hide the blush that rose to her cheeks. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," he said gently. "Just be yourself. That's enough." It was in that moment that Clara felt the walls she had built around her heart start to crumble. For decades, she had believed that love and connection were no longer meant for her. She had convinced herself that her days of joy were over, that companionship was a luxury reserved for the young. But Luke's words, his kindness, and his unwavering presence challenged that belief. She realized that maybe, just maybe, life still had something to offer her, something she had thought long gone. That evening, after Luke had left, Clara sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the day. She felt a mix of excitement and fear. Excitement because she could imagine a future where she wasn't alone, where she had someone to share moments, both big and small. Fear because it meant opening herself up again, allowing herself to be vulnerable after years of guarding her heart. But despite the fear, there was a spark she couldn't ignore. A few days later, a cold front moved in, bringing rain and wind. Luke, who had been planning to continue his travels, found himself staying longer because of the weather. Clara was surprised, but secretly pleased. They spent the day inside the barn repairing equipment and organizing supplies. The hours passed quickly, filled with conversation, laughter, and a shared sense of purpose. As evening approached, the storm grew stronger. The wind rattled the windows, and the rain pounded against the roof. Luke suggested staying the night rather than attempting the dangerous drive back to town. Clara hesitated at first, unsure if it was appropriate, but she finally agreed, realizing that it made sense for safety. That night, They sat in the living room with the fire crackling in the fireplace. The storm raged outside, but inside, there was a quiet comfort. They talked about their lives, their fears, and their hopes. Clara admitted for the first time that she had long believed she was too old for love, too set in her ways to experience romance again. Luke listened without judgment, his presence calm and reassuring. "You're never too old for love," he said softly. "It doesn't matter what age you are. What matters is being willing to open your heart." Clara felt a shiver run through her, not from fear, but from the truth of his words. She realized that she had spent so long closing herself off that she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. Luke's presence made her feel safe, valued, and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. As the night grew darker, they moved to the porch to watch the storm pass. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of earth and grass. They sat side by side in silence, the quiet moments speaking louder than words. Clara felt the weight of loneliness lift, replaced by a sense of connection and warmth. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be happy again, where she could share her days with someone who understood and cared for her. She realized that the fear she had carried of being too old, of being undeserving, was slowly dissolving. In its place was hope, fragile but persistent, that love could still enter her life. Luke, noticing the change in her demeanor, reached out and gently touched her hand.
It was a simple gesture, but it carried a depth of meaning.
Clara felt a warmth spread through her, a recognition that this connection was real, that it mattered, and that she had allowed herself to feel again. They sat there for hours, watching the storm clouds drift away, the moon rising above the horizon, casting a silver glow over the fields. Clara felt a shiver not from the cold, but from the realization that her life was shifting in ways she had never expected. The quiet routines that had defined her days were giving way to something new, something that promised companionship, understanding, and perhaps even love. By the time they went to bed, Clara's mind was full of thoughts and emotions she hadn't experienced in years. She was nervous, excited, and curious about what the future held. She knew that the bond with Luke was growing stronger, that her heart was opening again, and that life was no longer just about routine and survival. In the weeks that followed, Clara and Luke continued to spend time together, each day deepening their connection. They worked on the ranch, shared meals, and enjoyed quiet moments of conversation and reflection. Clara began to realize that age was not a barrier to happiness or companionship. She had spent years believing that her heart was closed, but Luke's presence had shown her that it was never too late to find joy and connection. Clara felt a renewed sense of purpose and vitality. She laughed more freely, smiled more often, and looked forward to each day with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in decades. The small acts of kindness, the shared tasks, and the quiet moments together were transforming her life, reminding her that it was possible to experience happiness and love again. And so, with each passing day, Clara embraced the changes that were occurring in her life. She allowed herself to feel, to hope, and to believe that the quiet life she had once accepted was no longer the only life she could have. The presence of Luke, steady, kind, and genuine, had brought warmth, connection, and possibility back into her days. Clara's heart, once guarded and cautious, was awakening again. She knew that the journey ahead would not be without challenges, but she was ready to face them with an open heart. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to hope, to dream, and to imagine a future where companionship, laughter, and love were not only possible, but within her reach. The following days on the ranch felt different for Clara. There was a quiet electricity in the air, a sense that something important was happening in her life. Luke was still there each morning, helping with the chores, fixing broken tools, and checking on the animals. But now, there was something more. It wasn't just the practical help. It was the way he looked at her sometimes, the way he paused to listen, the way he waited patiently for her to speak, never rushing or judging. Clara tried to keep her feelings in check. She reminded herself daily that she was older, that she had lived a full life already, and that she shouldn't expect more. Yet the more time she spent with Luke, the more she realized she wanted more. Not in a reckless way, but in a way that brought warmth to her heart and joy to her days. The thought that she could feel such connection again was both exciting and terrifying. One chilly morning, while they were feeding the horses, Clara noticed how skilled Luke was. He handled the animals with patience and care, always aware of their moods and needs. She watched him work and felt a flutter in her chest. For the first time in years, she was not thinking about what needed to be done next. She was thinking about him, and that thought brought a smile to her face. "You've got a good way with them," she said softly. Luke looked up, smiling. "They respect patience, and I can see you've taught them well. They know you care." Clara felt her heart warm at his words. It wasn't flattery. It was truth. He saw her for who she was, recognized her hard work, and appreciated it. That acknowledgement, simple as it was, meant more to her than she could express. That afternoon, a small accident shook them both. One of the younger horses, startled by a sudden noise, bolted across the field. Clara instinctively ran after it, calling its name, heart pounding with fear. Luke followed closely, moving quickly and confidently, helping to guide the horse back to the paddock. In the midst of the chaos, their hands touched briefly as they steadied the animal. The contact sent a jolt through Clara, a reminder that her heart was no longer completely under her control. When the horse was safe, they stood side by side, catching their breath. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a golden light across the fields. Clara felt her pulse racing, not from the adrenaline, but from the nearness of him, the unspoken connection that had grown between them. "You okay?" Luke asked, his voice gentle but filled with concern. "Yes," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Thanks to you." He smiled, and in that smile, Clara felt a wave of emotion she hadn't felt in decades. She realized that she trusted him, not just with the chores or the animals, but with her heart, her fears, and her vulnerabilities. That night, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows of the small ranch house. Luke, who had been planning to return to his own travels, suggested staying the night again, citing safety concerns. Clara agreed without hesitation. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her heart, chaotic, overwhelming, and yet oddly comforting. They prepared a simple dinner together, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, and laughing over minor mistakes. The act of cooking together felt intimate, a dance of coordination and shared effort that drew them closer without words. Clara noticed how natural it felt to have him around, how easy it was to talk, to joke, and to simply exist in the same space without pretense. After dinner, they moved to the porch with blankets and cups of tea. The storm continued, but inside the porch there was warmth, light, and a sense of security. Clara found herself talking about her fears, her regrets, and her hopes. She admitted how lonely she had felt for years and how much she had believed love was no longer possible for her. Luke listened quietly, nodding, his presence steady and reassuring. "It's never too late, Clara," he said. "Life doesn't end at a certain age. Love isn't a deadline. It's about timing, and sometimes timing is unpredictable, but it doesn't mean it's gone." She felt a shiver run down her spine, not from the cold, but from the truth in his words. For years she had shut herself off, believing that happiness and love were no longer meant for her. Now she realized that she had been wrong. There was still time, still possibility, still hope. As the night deepened, they shared stories of their pasts, laughing over small embarrassments and remembering moments of pride. Clara told Luke about her late husband, about the struggles of raising children alone, and the quiet victories that had defined her life. Luke shared his own stories, moments of loss, moments of triumph, and the lessons he had learned along the way. With each story, each laugh, each quiet pause, the bond between them grew stronger. At one point, the conversation fell silent, and they simply watched the rain outside. Clara felt her hand brush against his, and she did not pull away. Instead, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of his touch, the comfort of his presence, and the growing realization that she was no longer alone in her thoughts or in her life. "I've missed this," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "What do you mean?" Luke asked gently. "Action," she admitted. "Someone who sees you, really sees you. Someone who cares." He looked at her with a gentle smile. "You've always been seen, Clara. You just didn't realize it." The honesty of his words struck her deeply. For years, she had believed that she was too old, too set in her ways, too much of a solitary figure to ever experience companionship again. Now, she realized that the barriers she had built were not walls against others. They were walls she had built around herself, and Luke, with patience, kindness, and quiet determination, was helping her dismantle them piece by piece. The storm continued through the night, but inside the small ranch house, there was a sense of peace. They talked late into the night, exploring their thoughts, dreams, and fears. Clara felt a mix of anticipation and nervousness. She had not allowed herself to feel this way in decades, and the emotions were intense, yet comforting. As the hours passed, she realized that her heart had shifted. The fear that had held her back, the fear of being too old, of being undeserving, of opening herself to another person, was giving way to courage. She allowed herself to hope, to feel, and to imagine a life that included companionship, trust, and possibly love. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the fields glistening with rain. Clara and Luke stepped outside to see the sunrise, casting warm light across the wet grass and trees. They stood together in silence, letting the beauty of the morning fill the space between them. Clara felt a shudder, not from cold, but from the recognition that her life had changed, that her heart had opened, and that possibilities she had long thought impossible were now within reach. In the days that followed, Clara noticed a new lightness in herself. She moved through the chores with a sense of joy and anticipation. She laughed more freely, smiled more often, and felt a connection to life that she had forgotten existed. The ranch, which had once been a place of routine and duty, now felt alive with promise. Luke continued to be a part of her days, helping with work, sharing meals, and enjoying quiet moments together. Their relationship was not rushed or forced. It was steady, patient, and natural. Clara realized that the most meaningful connections were often built slowly, through shared experiences, trust, and mutual respect. And yet, even with all this joy, Clara could not ignore the lingering fear that occasionally returned. She worried about what others might think, about whether it was too soon to feel this way, and about whether she could truly allow herself to embrace love again. But each time the fear surfaced, Luke's presence reminded her that it was okay to feel, to hope, and to open herself to the possibility of happiness. Clara understood that life would always carry challenges, but she no longer faced them alone. She had someone who cared, who supported her, and who inspired her to believe in herself again. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with companionship, warmth, and love, no matter what form it might take. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the ranch, Clara felt a sense of calm and anticipation. Her life had shifted, her heart had awakened, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. Luke had shown her that age was not a barrier to connection, that love could appear when least expected, and that the heart was capable of renewal no matter how long it had been guarded. For Clara, the journey was far from over, but the most important step had been taken. She had allowed herself to feel, to hope, and to believe again. And in that belief, she found a strength and courage she hadn't known she still possessed. The days that followed the storm were calm and bright. The fields glistened with morning dew, the animals grazed peacefully, and the sun shone gently over the ranch. Clara woke each morning with a sense of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. Her life, once defined by routine and quiet solitude, now held a new kind of rhythm, a rhythm shaped by companionship, trust, and the warmth of shared experiences. Luke was still there, of course, arriving early each morning to help with the chores, but their relationship had shifted subtly over the past days and weeks. It was no longer just about work or passing time. It was about connection, understanding, and the small, meaningful gestures that spoke volumes. Clara had begun to notice the little things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle way he handled the animals, and the patience he showed when things didn't go perfectly. She found herself admiring him more and more, not just for his skills, but for the kind, steady man he was. One morning, as they worked together in the barn, Clara paused and watched Luke adjust the harnesses on the horses. She realized how comfortable she felt around him, how natural it was to share the space and the work. Her chest felt light, her heart warm, and a smile spread across her face. She hadn't expected to feel this way again, and yet here she was, alive with emotion, grateful for the moments they shared. "Morning," Luke said, noticing her pause. "You look like you've got something on your mind." "Just thinking about how different things feel now," she admitted. "It's nice." "Nice is good," he said simply. "You deserve nice." It wasn't just what he said, but the way he said it. Honest, kind, and without expectation. For years, Clara had believed that she was too old for love, too set in her ways to experience joy beyond her daily routine. Now, she realized how wrong she had been. Life, she discovered, had a way of surprising those who dared to open their hearts. As the day progressed, they worked side by side, feeding the animals, mending fences, and tending to the fields. Each task, once mundane and solitary, was now filled with conversation, laughter, and subtle touches that made her heart race. Clara found herself looking forward to every moment, every smile, and every word exchanged. She felt seen, appreciated, and alive in ways she hadn't imagined possible. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they decided to sit on the porch and watch the sky turn shades of pink and gold. Luke handed her a cup of tea, and they sat in comfortable silence. The world was quiet, save for the chirping of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. "You know," she said softly, "I used to believe that life had passed me by, that I was too old for love, too set in my ways to experience joy beyond routine. Luke turned to her, his eyes warm. And now, she said, smiling, I know I was wrong. Life isn't over. There's still so much to experience, to feel, and to share. He reached out and gently took her hand in his. The touch was light, reassuring, and filled with meaning. Clara felt a shiver of warmth run through her, a reminder of how much she had longed for connection, for understanding, and for companionship. For the first time in decades, she allowed herself to believe that she could be loved again, not just as a friend, but as a partner, as someone worthy of care and attention. In the following weeks, their bond continued to grow. They shared meals, repaired barns and fences together, and even spent quiet evenings reading by the fire. Clara found herself laughing more freely, feeling lighter, and savoring the small joys of life. She had discovered that companionship didn't have to be loud or dramatic. It could be simple, steady, and deeply fulfilling. One afternoon, while moving hay bales in the fields, Clara paused to catch her breath. Luke noticed and walked over, offering a hand to steady her. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Clara felt a wave of emotion she could no longer deny. Deeply, and she suspected he felt the same. You know, she said, her voice quiet, I never thought I'd feel this way again. Luke smiled, squeezing her hand gently. Neither did I, he admitted, but here we are. The honesty in his voice, the warmth in his touch, and the steadiness of his presence made Clara's heart swell. She realized that love wasn't about age or timing. It was about connection, respect, and the courage to open oneself to another person. She had spent years believing that she was too old, too set in her ways, and too cautious to experience joy again. Now, she knew that those fears had been unfounded. Life had given her a second chance, and she was ready to embrace it fully. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars appear, Clara felt a sense of completion. The journey that had begun with quiet days and cautious interaction had led to trust, understanding, and a deep emotional bond. She realized that the moments they had shared, the laughter, the work, the quiet talks, and the gentle touches, had built something meaningful, something lasting. I'm glad you stayed, she said softly, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Luke looked at her, his expression tender. Me too, he said simply. The simplicity of his words and the sincerity behind them touched her deeply. That Clara felt a shiver run through her, not of fear but of recognition. She had opened her heart, allowed herself to feel, and in return had been met with kindness, patience, and love. In the weeks that followed, Clara allowed herself to fully embrace this new chapter of her life. She no longer worried about age or timing. She no longer feared opening her heart. Instead, she focused on the joy of shared moments, the comfort of companionship, and the quiet happiness that came from being with someone who truly understood her. They worked together during the day, shared meals and laughter in the evening, and often sat quietly under the stars, appreciating the simple beauty of life. Clara discovered that happiness could be found not just in grand gestures or dramatic events, but in steady presence, gentle support, and moments of connection that felt effortless and natural. One sunny morning, as they finished repairing a section of the fence, Clara realized how much her life had changed. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, now felt alive with companionship and warmth. She no longer felt lonely. She no longer believed she was too old for love. Instead, she felt invigorated, cherished, and ready to embrace whatever the future held. That evening, they sat on the porch again, watching the sky turn golden as the sun set. Clara leaned slightly against Luke, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. She realized that love at any age was possible. It didn't arrive according to schedules or expectations. It came quietly, persistently, and when the heart was ready to receive it. I never thought I'd feel this alive again, she whispered. Luke squeezed her hand gently. You've always had it in you. You just needed someone to remind you. Clara smiled, feeling tears of gratitude and joy in her eyes. For decades, she had believed that her heart was closed, that love was no longer for her. Now she knew that she had only needed courage, patience, and an open heart to rediscover it. The days and weeks continued, filled with simple pleasures and shared experiences. Clara and Luke grew closer, their bond strengthened by trust, respect, and a deep understanding of one another. They laughed together, worked together, and shared quiet moments that spoke louder than words. Clara realized that life, even in its later chapters, could bring unexpected joy, companionship, and love. And so, Clara's life on the ranch transformed. She no longer faced each day with quiet resignation or solitary routine. Instead, she greeted the morning with hope, joy, and the anticipation of shared moments. She had learned that love was not bound by age, that life could surprise even those who had long given up, and that the heart was capable of renewal at any stage. As the sun rose one early morning, casting light across the fields and barn, Clara stood beside Luke, feeling the steady warmth of his hand in hers. She realized that her life had changed in ways she had never imagined possible. She was no longer alone. She was no longer resigned to quiet days and nights. She was alive, cherished, and loved. And in that quiet, golden moment, Clara understood the truth she had been slow to accept, that love could come when least expected, that connection was never limited by age, and that life, even after decades of solitude, could still hold beauty, warmth, and hope. Clara smiled at Luke, and he smiled back. No words were needed. Their hearts had spoken louder than any sentence ever could. Together, they faced the future with open hearts, knowing that companionship, joy, and love were not only possible, they were theirs to cherish every single day.